Hi guys! Today's story is that of April Millsap and how an app on her phone helped to solve her own murder. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Had my hair done this morning, what do you think? Woohoo! In today's story we are actually going to the States. Ooh, haven't done one in America for a while, or have I ever? That's terrible, I can't even think. I'm sure I have. Yes, I have. Jodi Arias case. That was something else. Today's story is set in Michigan in a really tiny little place called Armada. I want to call it Armada, but I think it's Armada. And it is tiny. It's like 2,000, like a population of 2,000. So small and so cute. This is so cute. At the time when this case happened, there was only 2 full-time police officers. That's how small and safe this place was. Really low crime rate. Nothing had happened since 1970 or something like that in terms of murder. And very strong community, and everybody sounds like one of those places where everyone knows everyone, a bit like this village. You can't like make a choice without Deirdre down the road knowing about it. It's like that. Our story begins in the summer of 2014, July the 24th to be exact. And let's talk a little bit about April. So April at this time is 14 years old, so she's a teenager, and I watched some lovely footage from her family, friends, and she sounds lovely. Very lovely. In lots of ways, a typical teenager, hanging out with her friends, talking about boys, shopping, lots of things like that, hanging out with her mates. Completely normal, which is nice. And she had a massive love of animals. She had a dog herself called Penny, who was a border collie, and they were best friends. Her mum would say that like in the morning, Penny would go and wait outside April's bedroom door for her to wake up, and she just loved her. And April did actually want to become a veterinarian. A vet. She wanted to be a vet when she grew up. She was kind, she was sweet, she was nice, she was a sweet girl. She was also incredibly into health and fitness, and she would often, every day, take Penny, her dog, out on walks. She enjoyed it, she liked hiking with the dog, and she wanted to be healthy. She would walk with Penny for hours at a time, so that was not unheard of. Now, on the 24th of July, usual day, her mum said that she didn't wake up until like midday or something like that, which is completely normal for teenagers. I am so jealous. I wish that I could do that now. I think even if I tried, I'd get tetchy legs. But anyway, that's beside the point. So she wakes up, and then at around 6 p.m, she decides to take Penny out for a nice hike. She knew better than to be out late at night when it was dark. So she'd gone out, and then as the evening drew on, her mum became increasingly worried because it was getting dark, and this was not like her daughter to be out after it has got dark. She tried to text her daughter and she got no reply. This is when panic started to set in a little bit, and then she decided that she would ring her, and it just went straight through to voicemail, and then the panic increased. Can you imagine? It's always just makes me feel sweaty. Little did she know that around the same time that she was panicking and worried and trying to work out what's gone on here, that the police at the police station had received a 911 call to say that they had found a body on a trail, walking trail, hiking trail, and they had called that in. Awfully sad. So it was a husband and wife, I believe, and they had come across a dog, Penny, who was in distress and quite upset, and had come up to them when they were on their walk, and they followed the dog into the wooded area slightly off of the path, and this is where they found the body of a young girl. You can see where I'm going with this. Not looking good, is it? At around this time, the mother, I didn't give their names, I'm so sorry, what's happened to me here? Okay, so April's mum is called Jennifer, and she is actually with Joshua, which is April's boyfriend. They've been together for about 1.5 years, very much in love, young love, lovely. Now, Jennifer had spoken to Josh and said, have you seen April? Have you spoken to April? He said, oh, I got an unusual text message. So they then go looking for April. They know that she'd gone to the hiking trail, so they decided to go there to look for her. And when they arrived there, they are met with a scene, a commotion, because by this time the police have received this 911 phone call and they are now at the scene, and they're not letting people into the trail and such because there is a body. So radio each other and they're like, oh, we've got a mum and a lad here and they're looking for a young teenager that has gone missing, teenage girl, and they just say, take them to the police station, get them there. So that's what happens. It's at the police station that they interview Jennifer, the mum, and Joshua, and they ask Jennifer for a description of the clothing that her daughter was last wearing, which she gives them. And it's from this description of the clothing that they then pass that forward to the officers at the scene, and they determine that this body is that of April, which is horrific. They've also taken a photo, and they actually, at this point, somewhere in this point here, they show the picture of April to her mother Jennifer, and she makes a positive identification, which is just so grim. One thing that really came across when I was researching this case, it was kind of like choking me up, because it made it, for some reason, I know they're all real, I know they're true crime, but when I was researching this one and watching footage and reading things, it really felt real. It felt like it had happened down the road. It was so strong, maybe because it was a small community and everyone was so affected by it. It just really came through. It was like, oh, and that's one of the reasons why this case really piqued my interest, because it was like a real community vibe, and yeah, like that came through strong. Like I said, very small community, so there was only 2 full-time police officers. This isn't going to work. This is a huge investigation that needs to happen here. So the FBI are called in, and also officers from Detroit, which is like 35 miles away from this Armada. Get a force together, let's go. The community were in complete shock. It did not take long, as it would here, here's a wagon. It would not take long for the community to hear about, there's been a body found on the trail. And one of April's friends, her friendship circle, they all text each other and they were like, oh, have you heard, blah, 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 including April in these text messages. And they had no idea that it was, in fact, April that had been killed. It wasn't until the following morning that they got phone calls and, it was said that it was April. So sad, so tragic. And it really rocked the community, really massively. One person said, like, you used to hear the sound of children playing, and then after this you just heard the sound of crickets. So it really rocked everyone, especially because the officers and the FBI, they didn't release any details of how this had happened, what had actually happened to April, because they didn't want to, give the killer any information. They hadn't caught anybody, so they didn't want to they didn't want to trip themselves up and give out information that could harm the case. Clever. Obviously the investigation now begins, and they question everyone that was on the trail at that time. They asked them all to come forward, like, did you see anything? Did you hear anything? Blah, 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 blah. They also had someone in mind, and bless him, he didn't help himself at all, but Josh, the boyfriend. It's always the boyfriend, always the husband, like that thing. So they asked him lots of questions, and they were like, where were you at the time, blah, blah, blah. And they thought, they had suspicions that Joshua was involved, the boyfriend. He panicked. When he was being interviewed, he just had a massive panic, and he was like, the last time I spoke to her, we had an argument. And he freaked out, and he basically, the minute he found out that she was missing, he deleted messages off of his phone. Josh, what are you doing? Teenagers, you know, the frontal lobe or whatever doesn't develop until you're 25 or 23, 25. I want to say 25, which is like, you know, mad, isn't it? So, but anyway, stupid move, love. So he deleted these messages. They were like, oh, that don't look good, does it? And they asked him where he was at the time of the murder and all of this, that and the rest of it. However, his story checked out in the end because he was with the person he said he was with his friend, and they had gone through a drive-through and he tried to give them a rundown of his day, and he actually checked out. Love him. He was very, very like anxious, worried. I mean, as you would be. He kind, isn't that interesting that even as a young lad, he knew that he would be looked at as a suspect, and he was like, deleting things. Silly, but yeah. However, do you remember I said to you that when he spoke to April's mum and she was like, oh, have you spoken to April when she was missing? He said, yeah, she sent me a weird text. Okay, well, that text was weird. And at 6:28, he received a text from April saying, I think I almost got kidnapped. So with that information, he did nothing. He didn't ring the police. He, again, frontal lobe, not developed. So he didn't ring anyone or like say, oh, I've had a weird message from April. He thought that she was being a bit dramatic and a bit silly. He didn't think much of it. And okay, that's not a stretch. As adults, you would be concerned and follow that message up perhaps, but no. So frontal thing. That didn't happen. So he received that text message at 6:28. They had a number of sort of misleading things going on. They had a witness come forward to say that she'd been very, very freaked out by some men in a white van, and that she had seen them, and she'd even filmed them leaving that area. And this was then the next number one like suspects in this white van, and they wanted to find them and talk to them because, you know, that is suspicious. This witness, this young girl, she had felt threatened by them, found it weird. She said that the driver was like pointing at her, and that, you know, she didn't like it at all. So that was the next big lead that they were following. All the time this is going on, obviously there is an autopsy done on poor April, and yeah, a lot of anger and a lot of rage in this one, guys, a lot. So her cause of death, official cause of death, was actually given as blunt force trauma to her head, but also asphyxiation. Now, the killer had beaten her around the head a number of times and also stamped on her. It's grim, like horrible. So much so that she had like a footprint, the shoe mark, he'd left a shoe mark on her face. But by stomping on her face and her neck, he'd like compressed the neck, and that would have caused asphyxia. So they were the sort of causes of death given. So just really gruesome and violent and angry, isn't it? That comes across like massively, like, okay, angry person. And again, that was not released to the public at this point, no. What next? They campaigned to find the white van, because that's the next big lead. No luck. And then they came forward. And actually, it was all explained away very nicely. The man was like, oh, I wasn't pointing at that young girl. The driver came forward. I wasn't pointing at the young girl. I was with like some clients, and I was pointing out work on houses that I'd done in the area, and they checked him all over. They checked him out, and he was also cleared. So Josh is cleared. The white van man is cleared. What next? They found April's phone. It was found about half a mile away from her body. And so this had been taken by the killer and dumped. And this is where it gets spicy, right? Because they sent that phone off, and they can do all sorts of marvellous things with phones and stuff, can't they? And they found that at the time of her murder, April was running like a fitness app on her phone. So April, she really helped in solving her own murder by having this fitness app running. And it's actually really, really like creepy, or like it gives you the shivers, because when they downloaded that information, you could see what happened. Not like a visual, but on this like fitness tracker, you know, it's like a line like following where you walk and all that. And it was showing her walking, you know, as a little blue dot or whatever. And then they knew from the time, all the timings as well. So this is good because they've got actual, I like times, don't I? I like having a timing to give someone, like, what were you doing at this time? So much easier than just, you know. The timing works in favour of Josh and all of the things that Josh said. You know, this text he got at 6:28, and her fitness app would suggest that literally minutes later she was then attacked. And it's horrible. You can see the dot, which is like her phone, just across the path, like in a sort of zigzag. So like a fight, like a scuffle. Well, basically, this is where she's being attacked, and that's horrible, isn't it? So yeah, and then it goes slightly off the path, and that's where she was murdered. And then all of a sudden, this blue dot just goes vroom, like that. So at walking speed, it was like da, 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 da. Then the zigzaggy, which is horrible because you know what's happening. Slightly off the path, horrible again, you know what's happening, and then boom, like that. What? And it's like, what the deuce? Anyway, they've now got a time, haven't they? So they're like, right, witnesses, we know a time and we know a location. Did anyone see anything at this time in this location on the trail? Go. And what do you know? A family saw it on the news and they were like, oh my God, yes. And they had actually seen April. So they came forward. It was a husband and wife, or a husband and his daughters, and they were walking the trail and they saw April. And now this is interesting. So behind April was a man on a blue and white motorbike, following her. And the husband, the man, witness, he said it looked like almost like a lover's tiff, or like an angry dad and daughter, like they'd had a row, which is just, that's chilling as well, isn't it? Because the anger that he had and knowing what he did, and it wasn't father and daughter, it wasn't a lover's tiff. He was going to murder this young girl. Awful. Anyhow, now they've got even more information. Blue and white motorbike, come on. And that explains why the dot goes like that, because he's on a blimmin' motorbike. So he murdered April, gets back on his motorbike and then goes. Now they are campaigning for information about anyone with a blue and white motorbike. This is a difficult task, but would you actually believe it? And you know, like last week I was like, oh my God, all these like strokes of luck happening left, right and centre. Oh, I've got hay fever. Oh, I want to scratch my eyes out. I digress. Blue and white bike. And then an officer, minding his own business, just driving along, driving in the car, eating donuts. Do they really eat donuts? Like in America, do the police, cops, do they actually, like, is that a real thing anymore? Because I'd love to see that. That would make me happy. Anyway, what is wrong with me today? Stay on topic, Sophie, on topic. He's driving along, minding his own business, drinking a coffee, eating a donut. And he looks like that, just like that, stopped at traffic or something like that. And then down this like driveway in front of a garage door, like parked in front of a garage, is a freaking blue and white motorbike. He's like, come on now. So he gets out, he takes a picture, no one home, snaps a picture, goes back to the police station. He's like, guess what? Look what I just found. Hello? I mean, it could lead to nothing, but what are the chances? He then goes back. His officer, whatever, you know, boss is like, let's go back, put some pressure on, let's have a chat. The bike is gone. But the homeowner is back home. They're home. And they have a chat. And the officer said he thought he was shady and that he was like lying, but like he couldn't put his finger on it and it was all a bit weird and whatever. So he was like, I've never seen that motorbike in my life. Like, it's not mine. Like, really weird. So they're like, okay. And then he shows them the picture. He's like, well, guess what, mate? Like, I took a picture of it. It was in front of your garage. He was like, I've only just got home. And that does ring true because there was no one there. So he's like, okay, weird. Anyway, on the investigation goes. It's not long after this that they decide that they need to really kind of put some pressure on this guy because he's acting shady as hell. And they're like, you know, we're not getting anywhere with any other inquiries. So we need to, like, you know, where is that bike? So they then speak to the guy again, and he says, he breaks. He's like, okay, I do know something about that bike, and I think it is this person, and that's all I know. So he gives the name of someone called James VanCallis. So the police get on their radio again. Address, please, James VanCallis. And they go and pay him a little visit. He's like, oh, I was here on that day and, you know, they can vouch for me and this, that, and all the rest of it. Okay, fine. So that's kind of the end of that for then. You know what I mean? Yeah, we'll go with that. So it all then comes to a massive head because when they return to the property to have another chat with him, they discover that in the back garden of the property, there are marijuana plants growing. Lots of marijuana plants growing. And although it's kind of proven that the marijuana plants, oh, get this. So James VanCallis lives with James VanCallis. He lives with his dad. So his dad is like the senior version. Of course, you know what I mean though. Like they're both called James VanCallis. So there's like the dad, senior, and the son, James VanCallis, junior. One's like 60 something, one's 30 something. And James Jr. lives also, they all live there together with, I'm not talking right, am I? Should we try and finish this together? Should we try and get through? Maybe it's the gin. They live with Crystal, which is Junior's girlfriend, and her young child. That's the setup. And lots of marijuana plants in the garden. So they arrest James and James, senior and junior. Senior is like, yeah, it's my weed. Shit. Like, okay. But junior is the one that is distributing it, apparently. So they have them both arrested. Now get this. The senior, James Senior, he actually has convictions for, he's a registered sex offender. So that would have alarm bells ringing. And I'm thinking, well, what? Like this guy? Do you know what I mean? And get this. The blue and white motorbike. Yes, hello. It's James Junior's though. But there's not a stretch to think that James Senior could have used it. That's what my brain was doing, okay? But they release James Senior. They're like, no, we think they had strong suspicions that this was James Jr. But no real hard and fast evidence. No DNA. They've taken DNA and there's no DNA of Junior, James. We'll just call him James, okay, now? So there's no evidence that of his DNA on April's body. They've arrested him on drugs charges, distribution of all this marijuana. So they've got him in and they want to nail him for April's murder. Like I said, circumstantial evidence only, but it is mounting up. He was the owner of the motorbike. When they searched his property, they found his phone, and on his phone they recovered a video of him wearing a pair of Nike Jordans, and they had been identified as the shoe print that they found on April's body. Now, when they searched the property, those shoes were not there. But in Facebook photos, videos on his own phone, he is seen wearing those shoes. Where are those shoes, James? They looked through his history. I love it when they do that. Although mine would be dodgy as. They looked through his history to see what he'd searched online. And in his search history, he'd put like how to attract younger women. How to get younger women to talk to you. I don't think following them on a motorbike and scaring the living life out of them works. Do you? As you can imagine, they arrest James on a murder charge. Now, they didn't have a lot of evidence, and it almost feels a bit of a stretch that they did arrest him for her murder. But they were pretty sure, gut feelings and all that. The owner of the motorbike, owner of the shoes that are now not freaking there. So it's not looking good, is it, for James? And then it's like, oh, the prosecution must have just been like, hello, ha 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 ha, happy dance. I thought someone was at the window watching me. Just the dog. So someone comes forward, and that someone is Crystal, James Jr.'s girlfriend. And she's like upset, very, 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 very chats. She's got it all to say. Now, she said she couldn't come forward before because she was terrified of James Jr. Now, it turns out that James had said to her in a really not very nice manner that she needed to keep her mouth frickin' shut, and that she needed to say that he only owned the pairs of shoes that he did own and not the Nike Jordans, and that she was never to speak of them, and that she shouldn't tell anybody what she'd seen that night. Now, what did she see that night? She saw that night that in the early hours, 3 a.m. in the morning, she came downstairs to find James Jr. cleaning his bike helmet and his shoes with hand sanitizer. So the shoes, they were never found, but he made an attempt to clean them up. When it was discovered that the perpetrator was on a bike, the autopsy, it was consistent, her beatings with a helmet, that she had been beaten round the head with a helmet. Piece of shit. He spoke to Crystal and said he'd messed up. Please cover for me. And she was so terrified that she did. And go to Crystal because she testified against him in court. Because that's not easy to do, is it, when you're desperately frightened of somebody? She stood up and she testified against him. Yes, please. Well done. So obviously it went to court. The defence said, oh, okay, on a motorbike, was he? There's no tyre tracks in the ground. No tyre tracks. Which, valid point. There was no DNA evidence of either. So like of April on anything that they found at James's house, and no evidence of DNA from James on April. So no like hard physical evidence. So that was their strongest argument, really. Tyre tracks, me. The jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison. He appealed many times. It's basically like, you know, he appeals, it's denied, he appeals, it's denied, rinse and repeat over and over. So yeah, good though. And he just always says there's no time marks and there's no physical evidence, and it's like, okay, but shall we not forget the actual what we do have? Piece of... And that concludes today's video. Felt like lots of moments of kind of community, and when you watch the footage of them talking about it, like they interviewed probably the whole town, like, yeah, it really did affect people very, very deeply, and people really pulled together. And also the fact that she had that fitness app on her phone, it's like, yes, because that really helped the police to have a definite time, location, see what happened. No, like, you know, it tied everything together. It kind of proved the fact that someone was on the motorbike with that. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, like, well done, April. From beyond the grave, you helped to, like, kind of solve your own murder. I'm always conflicted, by the way, because, you know, when, like, I always think, what can we learn from these stories? I don't always talk about that, but I think it. Like, if I'm reading a case or researching, my little brain, maybe that's why people are interested in true crime so much. It's like, what can we learn? How can we keep ourselves safe? That's what I think anyway. So yeah, I always kind of think that when I'm like reading through. Sometimes it's easier than others. Sometimes you're like, oh, like, you know, why did they do that? Like that's a bad move or whatever. You know, and sometimes I get cross with the world. Like, you should be able to go for a stroll and be safe. Like, you should be able to walk your freaking dog and be okay. But on the same note, you have, like, this is the world we live in. We do have to keep ourselves safe. How many gins have you had, Soph? Come on. But anyway, I'm going to carry on because I think it's important to say. So yeah, I do think that. I get cross with the world sometimes, but I guess from this case, because we don't live in a perfect world where we can all just go out for a stroll and walk our dog and be safe, you can take from it that walk with a friend, don't go on your own. I'm trying to think if I've got any other nuggets of wisdom. Don't have your earphones in. Don't have them in. You need to be alert so you can hear what's occurring around you. And Paul always says to me, go for here, walk. Which actually I was like, really? But like a proper good old punch to that bit there. Although in the moment when you're like freaking out and you never know how you're going to react. But yeah, he's like here and the ghoulies. Try and remember that if I'm ever in that situation. Throat, balls. I was going to like show you the dog again today, but he's having a proper good old snooze. He got very excited earlier when the hairdryer was on, you see. So now he's like absolutely out of it. But one day when he's here by my feet, I'll show you him again because he's just damn cute. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I do hope you can join me next week for another true crime story and a mug or a glass or a vase or a jar of gin. In the meantime, be safe, walk with a friend, don't have your earphones in. Bye!